Hey folks, I'm Spencer, and on today's episode of Cult Mania we're talking about one of my absolute favourite topics in all of cinema, King Kong! So, with Godzilla vs Kong just around the corner at the time of recording, I thought now seemed like the perfect time to sort of discuss why I think King Kong is one of the greatest, most important movie characters, movie series of all time, and sort of just go into why I think after nearly 90 years we're still getting films about the eighth wonder of the world, and why people are still absolutely flocking to see them, why they are still such a huge event when we get new King Kong films. So let's get on with it. I think this is the most obvious of all the reasons on this list of why we keep getting King Kong films, because they are always these huge technical spectacles. Even, if you think about that first film coming out in 1933, no one had ever really seen a film like it. Yes, we'd had films with a degree of sort of special effects, but nothing on the scale of that. We'd never had that use of rear projection before. All of Willis O'Brien's stop motion stuff, that's all invented, properly shown for the first time in King Kong. And audiences had never seen anything like it. You see all those reports that people ran screaming from the cinema because they just couldn't believe that these things could be possible. They believed that they were in some way real, which is strange, but it speaks volumes to how groundbreaking that film is. I mean, it's groundbreaking in more ways than just those effects. It was the first American talkie film that had a completely original score that, ebbed and flowed with the action on screen. It had the biggest orchestra that had ever recorded music for a film. I think it's something like 46 people in the orchestra. So it was this huge, big event film that I think, people act like Jaws is the first blockbuster, but it is that sort of film for the 1930s. And even as we move forward into later King Kong based films, they might not be at the absolute cutting edge technology wise, but they're always using something new, something that old versions of Kong haven't really used before. If we take the two Toho films, the King Kong vs Godzilla and King Kong Escapes, that was taking advantage of all of the new concepts that were going around with the suitmation. They were, it was the first King Kong film that was in colour. It was the first one that, it was the first big sort of widescreen King Kong film. I'm talking about King Kong vs Godzilla. It's always doing something that you've not seen before. Then, I don't really rate the 76 King Kong, the Jeff Bridges one. But the suit in that, if you look back at Godzilla vs Kong and then you look at the suit that they made for that and the big, massive animatronic hand that got stuck for a week flipping someone off, that stuff is so impressive, and that really is a technical wonder. I don't think the film is, but I think the effects in that are. Then you jump forward to Andy Serkis doing all of the motion capture for the Peter Jackson one, the fantastically detailed miniatures that they made and blended with CGI. It's the first Kong film with huge CGI. It was one of the first films that I remember being like, oh my god, the CGI in it was amazing. It blew my little child mind. And then, again, we've gotten more sophisticated motion capture that they used for something like Kong Skull Island. There is even more CGI in that film, much more sort of lavishly designed. the scale in that film is so much bigger than any of the others, and I think this is why one of the reasons that Kong endures, because all of this technology is just it's a brilliant way of taking advantage of this technology. In part because King Kong's a gorilla. We all know what a gorilla looks like, and I think it's almost like anyone that works in effects goes, we're going to do Kong because it will prove that we've got the best technology, because we all have a reference point for it. Not that we have a reference point for everything in King Kong, which brings me on to my next point. I think Skull Island is one of the best locations for any piece of media, any piece of entertainment there is. If I could go to any place from any film, Skull Island would probably be the one I'd want to go to. It would be bloody terrifying, but I just think it's fantastic, and it works on a lot of levels because it plays into dinosaurs. Everyone loves dinosaurs. Skull Island's got dinosaurs on it. That's fantastic, but it's also, we've seen it because it's its own enclosed location. You've just got so much room to play around with. You've got, something like Skull Island does far more with like strange, weird creatures, and I think some of the effects in that, they're so well designed, and I think it's that Skull Island gives directors so much freedom to create these strange, wonderful creatures, and on top of those wonderful, strange creatures, all those sort of something like Peter Jackson's one where you get those much more realistic dinosaurs, or even the old school stop motion stuff where it's this weird hodgepodge, not particularly accurate, but sort of strange version of real dinosaurs that makes no sense, but it's just, I don't know. It's how much, like I said, it's how much freedom it gives a filmmaker to just come up with whatever they want. They can put whatever they want in these films because Skull Island gives you so much freedom. And it's a jungle. Jungles look bloody brilliant on film. They always have, and they always will, because you can be so vibrant, they can be really colourful, you can have just so much fun with the sets and, the villages, and it is just a playground for creative filmmaking. You can just do so much. And of course, I think that is a key part of it, that a lot of directors fancy going to exotic places, and King Kong's a perfect excuse to disappear off to Hawaii or Vietnam, I'm sure, was where they filmed some of Kong Skull Island. It is just that sort of thrill of going out and sort of being able to create and discover somewhere fantastic. Even if you don't always have the best idea about the sort of people that should be there. This is going to be a strange one, but I think one of the key reasons that people keep making King Kong films is because so many King Kong films are incredibly problematic. I mean, the original came out in the very early 1930s, so it's no surprise that its racial politics and its gender politics are incredibly iffy. I'm not here to get into a discussion of whether King Kong was made as a commentary on mixed race relationships, because there are so many arguments about that. If you want to know about that, there are plenty of arguments, and I don't think we will ever know whether it was, I think there is definitely perhaps an unconscious part of it. It's whether it was a conscious decision that only the filmmakers and the writers can know, and I don't think they'd have ever been very honest about it if that was what they were. But even outside of that, you have the fact that Fay Wray spends the entire film screaming, fainting, being carried around by either a giant gorilla or a bloke. it's hardly, the most empowered performance. But I think, if you look at something like Peter Jackson's version of the story, Naomi Watts' Andara has a much more sort of proactive role, even though she does spend still a lot of time screaming, running away from things. At least she's a bit more active, and she's a character who's given a full backstory. And then if you look at Brie Larson's Mason Weaver in Skull Island, she's an action hero. She gets big action set pieces. She is a key part of the big final battle. There is a much more of a progression. And I think, the same goes for the treatment of the indigenous people of Skull Island. It's a very, very caricatured, cartoonish representation in the original film. You then go into the Toho stuff, which is possibly even worse because it's Japanese people in blackface, which is horrific. And, even in 2005 or whenever Peter Jackson's one comes out, they are incredibly sort of scary, almost feel like they've sort of wandered out of Cannibal Holocaust or something like that. It's still very scary black people, and that's still uncomfortable. It's only really Skull Island that has the indigenous people of Skull Island be a sort of more friendly, slightly more understandable, more positive representation for those characters. They're not just the people that sacrifice people to King Kong. It completely removes that element. And I think it'll be interesting to see if we get another fresh Kong in the future, whether that persists or whether we go back to terrifying, scary native people. I will say I'm really sorry. I know I've not really talked much about the 76 Kong. It's mainly because I've seen it once, I really didn't like it, and I didn't want to waste another 2 hours and 15 minutes of my life watching it again for the purposes of this, because I just don't find it. I don't think it's that important, at least in regards to this. Anyway, on to the next topic of our discussion, which is... As I said, I think that Kong and Skull Island and all of the elements of the natural King Kong story are a playground for imagination, and I think directors, filmmakers have shown that, in that no Kong is a fixed genre, and I feel like each new interpretation plays up an element that the others haven't. So if we take the original, which is much more of it's an adventure with romance. It's got elements of horror, although I don't know how intentional those were. And I think, all of them, to a degree, have an element of tragedy to them. I think Kong is almost, in a way, it's sort of a Shakespearean tragedy in that we all know that there is a negative ending coming. No matter what happens throughout the film, you sort of always in the back of your mind know that things don't go well in the end. But then, actually, I say that, you go into Son of Kong, which is much more of a family adventure. It's much more playful. We go into Toho's ones, which have, Godzilla vs. Kong is much more just a standard kaiju movie that they made. The destruction is ramped up massively. It's much more about the chaos of fighting. It basically birthed the versus genre. We had Godzilla fight one other monster, but it became the set pattern from then on. Then you have King Kong Escapes, which is a sci-fi film, much more so, with Doctor Who, not that Doctor Who, creating a Mecha Kong to mine things, and then he goes that the Mecha Kong's rubbish and gets a real Kong. But yeah, it's weird, it's sci-fi. Then I'd say, you have the 76 one, which is going much more for an adventure-y, blockbuster post-Jaws style film. You have King Kong Lives, its sequel, which just decided to add a lot of being really shit, which didn't work out. Then Peter Jackson's one, like I said, has much more of a sort of horror vibe to it, in both, you know, the representations of the native people, that horrible, horrible pit sequence, which is genuinely disgusting and makes me kind of a bit scared and sick right now. You have the cut Pteranodon sequence, which is like something from Jaws. It has much more of a sort of dark, horror-y vibe. And then Jordan Vogt-Roberts did Skull Island and made it feel much more sort of in line with modern superhero-y stuff. You know, it had a much more comic book vibe. You had a lot of video game references in there. You had all the war stuff, the Apocalypse Now influences. I think that's the thing. I mean, even Godzilla vs. Kong, and we haven't even seen it yet, but Adam Wingard has said that Kong is influenced in that film by 80s action heroes like John McClane, and, you know, everyone pointed out the big sort of die-hard leap that's in the trailer. It's a character and a world and a series that you can bring so many different genre elements to. So you can always keep it fresh and different and interesting, despite the fact that we all know the bare bones stuff that has to be there. And I think the key part is that I know I keep saying it, that imagination is a huge part of why Kong has continued, but I think it's that there is just something basic that human beings attach themselves to about the world of Kong, that I think it has captured the imagination. Each film almost carries on its life until the next one, because people, they are films that stick with people. It is a story that you will always remember the first time you saw a King Kong film. For me, I'd first seen a very small section of King Kong, the 33 one, on my nan's TV, you know, black and white, and it was absolutely shit scared. Terrified me. I was always worried because I only saw the bit at the end when he eats all the villagers and then like rampages through New York, and I was genuinely terrified that his face was going to be at my bedroom window and he was going to reach in and yeet me out the window. And that has stayed with me. And the first Peter Jackson's one will always be one of the most important films in my life, because I mean, it was the first 12A I went to see. I probably shouldn't have been to see it because I'd have been like 7. And it probably did scare me, but it was just a wondrous experience. I mean, I sat there for 3 hours. I was 7 and I sat there for 3 hours just in awe of that film, because it was the first time I'd seen a film that had like such a realised world, the effects work. It was the first film that really sort of emotionally involved me. And, you know, it was the fact though that I saw that film and then it continued. I'm sure I had a King Kong birthday cake that came with a map, and I loved that map. I played with that map all the time. I played the PS2 game to death. I can probably walk you through that game even now from like photographic memory of it. I read this fantastic book cover to cover, studied the pictures in it so much. It was the first film that I ever became obsessed with, and I think that's true for everyone that sees King Kong as a child, whether you are, Peter Jackson remade it because he loved that original film so much. My dad often talks about going to the cinema with his dad to see the 76 one. That's always been something that stuck in my mind when he's told me about that, and I think there will be a similar generation of people that have grown up like me with the Peter Jackson one, or with Skull Island. I'm sure that will have an impact on people, because Godzilla vs. Kong will be a huge first step into that world for a lot of people. And I just think it sort of buries its way into you, Kong does, and it just doesn't let you go. They're just really special films, and even the ones that I don't think Godzilla versus Kong, King Kong versus Godzilla, the Toho one, whatever way round it is, it's not one of the most amazing films ever, but it was a key thing that got me into monster movies, got me into Japanese cinema. It's the first time I'd seen a film dubbed, first time I'd seen a film made probably in a non-Western country, and now I'm obsessed with Japanese culture, and it's in part because I was first fascinated with King Kong, and now I'm fascinated with Godzilla. It's wormed its way into so many different films. Even films that aren't King Kong films. Jurassic Park owes so much to King Kong. So does probably Planet of the Apes was a success probably because of King Kong. Even the new ones, because it's Andy Serkis acting as a chimp, because he'd acted as a gorilla in King Kong. It's just... anything with a fantasy island on it owes a debt to King Kong. And I think it's an inescapable, huge part of cinema. King Kong is pure cinema. It's just... that's as much as I can say. It is... King Kong is cinema in the most core, important way possible. It's just brilliant. I cannot wait for Godzilla vs. Kong. So that's why I think King Kong is such an enduring, important character, film series, whatever you want to call it. Let me know down in the comments what you think of Kong, what was your introduction to the fantastic world of King Kong? Let me know down in the comments. Like and subscribe so you don't miss any more videos, and I shall see you next time.